Hello, children. My name is Peter Trump, but the kids call me Boxman. Today, you will be subjected to my building, painting, and reviewing of the Trump Peter 1/700 scale battleship Littorio, whilst I hold you at gunpoint. Don't worry, it's just a formality. Why did I choose this ship? I guess it was the weather. No, really, my original package was lost in a typhoon. As a last resort, I desperately scoured Amazon for a replacement that would arrive before my return to prison, which drew me to the Littorio class of battleships and their uniquely Italian attributes. I was sold. This kit was first released in the year 2011 with over 440 parts. It might seem intimidating at first, until you realize that as an Italian ship, about half of that is going to be dedicated to lifeboats. Let's get this thing unboxed. The plastic has a strangely appetizing crispness to it. The fresh factory air from the sealed bags, combined with the pleasant aroma of polystyrene, coalesces into a symphony of scents. If not for my hearty breakfast of MRI machines, I wouldn't have been able to stop myself from having a munch. Trumpeter splits the ship's hull at the waterline, allowing you to build the model in 3 configurations. The first is full hull, the objectively correct option and the one I'll be going with. Next up is waterline, for anyone with living memory of the Twin Towers. And lastly, my personal creation, airline. To add a bit of difficulty to this build, I finally dipped my balls into the world of photo etch. This upgrade set is from White Ensign Models, and I bought it because it looked pretty simple, but also because Amazon had nothing else. Its instructions are not confusing whatsoever. If you think they are, you must be visually impaired. In that case, photo etch is probably not a good idea, and you may also find yourself labeling sprues for reasons beyond simply maintaining the facade of organization. Couldn't be me. Logically, I begin at the last step in the instructions, gluing the hull together. The best glue to use for this is Tamiya's extra thin cement, because it is compelled by a magical force known as capillary action to seep into even the tightest of crevices. It leaves no residue, and it smells really nice. Merely gluing is insufficient, as I need to tackle the huge gaps in the hull. I grabbed some putty and mixed it with lacquer thinner. Masking off the more delicate upper section of the hull, I applied this concoction haphazardly, oblivious to the fact that it had begun seeping underneath the tape. Fortunately, the putty dissolves in lacquer thinner, and I'm able to clean up my mistakes fairly easily. Once I'm positive the putty has fully hardened, I put it through a motorcycle accident simulator to smooth out any unsightly blemishes. I take this one step further by unifying the hull surface with black primer, revealing additional imperfections for me to remove with some smooth sandpaper. One more coat of primer just to tie everything together, and it's time to add some plating details. I'm using the masking tape and primer trick, where the areas covered by masking tape become recesses in the hull paneling, while the exposed areas get flooded with primer and become raised edges. Subscribe if you love edging. Is it historical?
Nah.
Does it look good?
Questionably.
Josh, fuck off. Is War Thunder the sponsor of today's video? Yes. Hey, do you prefer tanks, planes, helicopters, or ships? That was a trick question because War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, has them all. Take your pick of over 2,500 vehicles, ranging from the whimsical biplanes and battleships of a bygone era to the menacing mangling machines of modernity. Then hop in the proverbial battle bus and immerse yourself in epic tussles, involving tanks on the ground with planes and helicopters duking it out. Hit points, be gone. Each vehicle is intricately modeled down to its individual components, making unaliving your enemies more satisfying than ever. War Thunder is available for free on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation right now. New players and returning players who haven't played in 6 months can use my link in the pinned comment or description to get a huge bonus pack. That includes more Silver Lions than I have in my personal account, premium vehicles, 7 days of premium time, and an exclusive vehicle decorator. Moving on, it's time to build all of the ship's various weapons, trinkets, and doodads, starting with the main gun turrets. Each of them has a slightly different life raft arrangement, which I guess necessitates the drilling of a whole bunch of holes. I'm not a big fan of the 15-inch guns included in the kit, so I'm not going to use them. Instead, I busted out my Elegoo Mars 3D printer to make my own. After removing the guns from the build plate, I dunked them in what appears to be piss, but I can assure you it's less than half before blasting them with a cancer beam to fully cure the resin. Fully hardened, the guns can be removed from their supports and glued into the plastic blast bags. Here's how they look compared to the originals. I'll glue the main guns to their turrets later, so I set them aside temporarily. Next up is the ship's secondary armament of 6-inch guns. These turrets look like mini versions of the primary turrets, and assembling them is pretty much the same. After they're done, I violently chuck them onto my table before setting them aside. I've been ignoring the photo-etched parts like I ignore my wife and kids, but inevitably I must face my fears by knocking them all out in one fell swoop. I first bludgeon these itsy-bitsy guns, which both my camera and eyeballs refuse to focus on. Following up on that, I brutalize the ship's aircraft catapult and cranes, nearly replacing the plastic parts entirely with photo-etched ones. The crane's pulleys seem out of scale, so I remove them, like I removed that cretin who voiced my Bismarck video from this plane of existence. Speaking of cretins, who decided that a battleship needs this many boats? I counted 23 of all shapes and sizes. Along with the life rafts that cover the entire ship, it's giving lack of confidence. Like they were just ready to abandon ship at the drop of a dime, which isn't doing wonders for the unfair portrayal of Italian military competence. Wrapping up the rest of the weapons, I build 12 of these tiny turrets, 4 of these pitiful pea shooters, and 8 of these aircraft annihilating apparatuses, which I safely store in this sectioned-off stockpile. Subscribe and share the video with your second son. Flipping through the instructions booklet to find another random step for me to complete, I land on gluing down the main deck, in flagrant violation of Craigslist TOS. In my defense, the instructions booklets almost never make sense if you actually want to paint your model. And frankly, Craigslist should mind their own fucking business and pay more attention to the unspeakable things going down in their services tab. Because I met all 12 of my hostages there. I populate the ship's deck with various maritime contraptions of both plastic and photo etch, before finally beginning work on the superstructure. Assembling the plastic is light work, but I'm balls deep in foreign territory when it comes to all the little railings. It doesn't help that some of the photo etch instructions are just 2D diagrams, for some reason unbeknownst to me. In spite of the unhelpful instructions, I do my best to erect this massive tower, but it's not all smooth sailing. Not having a specialized bending tweezer or a diamond file is as blasphemous as pulling up to the function without the customary coleslaw and methamphetamine. I poorly assembled a platform thingamajigger from a bunch of little metal pieces, but was pretty proud of the result. That was until I saw this massive gap where there's supposed to be none. I was on the verge of tears, jumping over 6 out of the 7 stages of grief and landing straight at acceptance, until I realized I could just use a spare part to fill in the gap, completing my custom femur breaking machine. The footage is not related. The rest of the tower's construction is pretty uneventful, so let's carry on. This battleship needs somewhere to store its band of big, beautiful boats. Luckily, the upgrade set completely revamps the area into a beautiful outdoors venue, where the crew can gather around and talk about politics, such as the historic Italian Senate incident of 2022. The ship's funnels get a well-deserved makeover as well. After all, it's their job to direct smoke and other fumes out of the ship's bowels, where all the pizza ovens are located. Wow, that was quite the wisecrack, wasn't it? With the superstructure assembly done and dusted, I return back to the hull to glue down its railings. A few bars need to be cut off in order for them to fit properly, which the instructions straight up gloss over.
That's just common sense, dumbass.
Nah, White Ensign Models is just not very accommodating towards the mentally challenged, such as myself. Fellas, I never claimed to be perfect. Sure, I'm built like an Adonis, I have an IQ of 600, and my audience is predominantly female, but I do make mistakes. I royally fucked up the railings on the bow by installing this whole section backwards, Frantically flipping through the instructions looking for an opportunity to offload the blame, it became evident that part number 3 was indeed labeled as the forecastle railing, to my great dismay. I didn't feel like ripping the railing out and destroying it in the process, so it's time to start painting. Just look at all these parts, ready to go. I first coat the entire model in primer, which helps the paint to adhere to the surface. I then move on to painting the red and white stripes on the deck. First, I mask off the white areas entirely by eyeballing it, because I can't be bothered to do anything more. After that, I spray some red on account of my kidney stones and do the same to the deck. The result is a little messy, since some paint bled underneath the masking tape, but it's nothing a few touch-ups in a later black wash can't hide. For the aft wooden deck, I create an exaggerated wood effect by masking off individual planks and switching colors 3 times while spraying. This is a pretty risky maneuver to pull, since you can't exactly tell how it's going to work out until you've spent 5 hours painting. I also make things worse for myself by always eyeballing my paint ratios. I've regressed a little after my previous build. This result is not convincing. The first layer ended up a little too dark, but a brown wash later on should balance things out. With both ends of the ship's deck painted, I mask them off using hundreds of individual pieces of tape before I paint the rest of the ship's surfaces using Tamiya Feel Blue. I can immediately tell that masking all of this stuff is gonna be my 13th reason. That means I'm gonna kill myself. And while I'm gonna skip it with the power of editing, you kids better remember that I sacrificed 2 whole days of my life for this tomfoolery when I could have been out in the streets touching grass and preying on the financially disadvantaged. Anyways, you know the drill. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. This Lovecraftian horror named Dylan dared to land on my ship, so I drowned him where he stood in superglue. Gruesome executions aside, I move on to painting the hull, starting with the black boot stripe, which I mask off using 1mm thick masking tape. For the anti-fouling paint, Trumpeter suggests you use red, but that just defeats the entire purpose of building an Italian battleship. So instead, I opt for cooking up the brightest green I can possibly get away with. I'm not sure how historically accurate this color is, and I don't really care. I appreciate historical details, but for me, modeling is just a silly hobby I partake in when I'm flip-flopping between my numerous unhinged pastimes. To make the lower hull look more interesting, I tried out the same technique I used before on the wooden deck, masking individual hull plates and changing colors a few times. Too bad it ends up looking like garbage. I went way overboard with that final color layer, ruining the whole thing. So I had to paint over the entire hull lightly to tone the effect down. Problem solved. Obviously, the top half of the ship isn't supposed to be green, so I mask off the bottom and hit everything above the waterline with gray, harder than I hit my wife with facts and logic, because I'm all about communication. With painting complete, finally being able to remove the masking tape is cathartic. For the sake of my own mental well-being and your safety, I'm probably never going to do masking by hand ever again. If $15 is the only thing preventing me from crashing out, then that's money well spent in my book. And there you have it. The hull will never be as pristine as it was in this moment. Before I proceed with weathering, I need to make a few touch-ups. If you've frequented my channel before, you're probably familiar with my incredible hand painting skills, which put even the great masters to shame. For centuries, I've been using almost exclusively Tamiya for hand painting, but it has been brought to my attention that they kinda suck ass for that purpose. So I splurged on this Vallejo paint set to see if I can pay my skill issue to go away. While I'm still lacking in the skills department, it certainly makes hand painting a more enjoyable task than it used to be. And yeah, I also got a fancy little paintbrush made out of horse pubes or something bougie like that, because the AdSense money is now bankrolling this hobby instead of Shaniqua from my local Burger King. Instead of airbrushing the propellers with a gold or bronze color, I paint them brown by hand, and then dry brush them with bronze, so they don't look obnoxiously metallic before mercilessly impaling them onto their shafts. With the touch-ups out of the way, I apply the ship's name tag and airplane markings and unite the 15-inch gun barrels with their turrets using superglue. I then seal the base paint job with a gloss clear coat, in the process destroying this spider web on the superstructure, because I took a 2-month break from this build to work on the Kremlin. Now I'm moving on with applying washes, starting with this absolutely disgusting looking bottle of enamel paint for the ship's wooden deck, the contents of which I slather liberally onto the wooden surfaces and the life rafts. Put your pitchforks down. I'll come back to clean up the excess once the paint is dried. While I was busy working, this man, who I'm pretty sure is named Dylan, rudely invaded my personal space before fucking off after seeing I came strapped. He returned a few times and we engaged in glorious combat. I really wanted to capture him whole and seal him inside my ship, but sadly he evaded my wrath. Back to scale modeling. I apply Tamiya's black panel liner to detail dense surfaces, which adds fake shadows and highlights the details. Unlike with the deck wash, I try my best to apply the panel liner in small areas, allowing my best friend, capillary action, to do all the heavy lifting, by forcefully coercing the ops into narrow alleyways where they can be ambushed with minimal chances of escaping. After the wash is fully dried, I use some enamel thinner to wipe most of it away. It might seem like a waste of time and effort to apply all that paint just to remove it, but if you look at life that way, every pedestrian that found themselves in the headlights of my 2012 Toyota Prius was a waste of time too. To take the shading one step further, I try reviving my shattered dreams of attending the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts with a smidgen of oil paint. I get a little help from this fast-drying thinner, which I mixed a few drops of into the paint, resulting in a moderately thin brew that I dot lightly around the entire model before blending it down in vertical streaks. The effect is pretty subtle, which is perfect for the relatively pristine condition I want my Littorio to be in. With that, I begin the final assembly, gluing all the parts down for good, starting with the orange-flavored life rafts, whose pegs are a pain in the ass to fit into the hole. Wait, hold up. Instead of just letting gravity keep the turret secure, I use magnets crudely glued to toothpicks to hold them in place. Not the little turrets, though, because I don't really care about their posability. So I just super glue them like normal. Next up is the first level of the superstructure, followed by the rear funnel and tower. After that is the first funnel, and finally, the north tower goes down. Then I go around placing all 8 of the remaining anti-aircraft guns that haven't been secured yet. At the ship's ass, I glue down the crane, aircraft catapult, and aircraft. And because my placement of the crane doesn't make sense, I reposition it to point backwards. I almost forgot the ship's primary armament. This is a truly impressive armada of boats, many of which are motorized, to cut Papa John's delivery times in half. In all seriousness, if anyone in the comments knows why the Littorio has so many boats lying around, I'd like 2 pepperoni pies. Thank you very much. Lastly, I glue down the stairs, which are not explicitly mentioned in the photo etch instructions, so I ended up eyeballing which ones to use and where. For some final touches, I add a few rust streaks around the ship using oil paint, and I also paint these thingies. I have no clue what they are, but they might be like those flashing lights you see on airplanes. If anyone in the comments knows what they are, I'd like to add a 2-liter Dr. Pepper to my order. Thank you very much. The ship is complete but very shiny, so I blast it with a flat clear coat to achieve a matte finish. Normally that would complete the build, but I'm trying to be a little more rigorous in my craft, so obviously I try adding wires that you can't even see unless the model is against a white background. Try to ignore the fact that I'm connecting the rigging to the completely wrong platform, but let's be for real. Nobody would have known that if I hadn't self-reported. Rigging is probably the hardest thing out of anything in this entire video, even me. If anyone in the comments has any tips and tricks for rigging, I'd love to hear it, as I'm always looking for ways I can improve my skills, but also add breadsticks to my order. Thank you very much. Trumpeter doesn't include any flags for the ship, but luckily, I have extras from a sheet that I bought in the last video. I dip them in water and then stick them on tinfoil so they can be bent into whatever shape I please before I glue them to the ship. And then I went ahead and made one of the most bewildering mistakes of my life. I spent an entire afternoon painting a fancy Italian flag nameplate. But can you spot the error? I'll give you a hint. The flag is fucking flip-flopped. Luckily, I kept a cool head, didn't freak out at all, and fixed my mistake like a big boy.
But Boxman,
You may quip.
that's still the wrong flag. It's missing the arms of Savoy that the Kingdom of Italy.
Time for the ratings. Let's see how this kit registers on the Boxman D.I.C.K scale. Detail, 7.1 out of 10. Interesting to build, 8.0 out of 10. Craftsmanship, 8.4 out of 10. Keen fit, 8.0 out of 10. That puts Trumpeter's 1/700 scale battleship Littorio at a 31.5 on the D.I.C.K scale, or a 78.75%, a very respectable score. This is a great kit for intermediate scale modelers with any interest in battleships or the culinary arts. Just like the Planet Fitness locker room, no model building is complete without a little size comparison. As you can see, I've whipped out Revell's 1/700 scale Bismarck, which has a pathetic flaccid score of 28 millimeters on the D.I.C scale. It's a little funny when Bismarck fans equate it to the Iowa or Yamato, when the Bismarck itself gets boxed up like a fish at Costco by battleships several thousand tons smaller than it. Thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Sign up for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox using my link in the pinned comment or description right now. New players and returning players who haven't played in 6 months can get a massive bonus pack that includes a ton of stuff. Before you go and get a head start on that beautiful King Tiger, just remember that I will definitely not be stalking you at low tier. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you skipped ahead, you won't find my credit card information, which I hid somewhere. Anyways, I'll put down the gun. You're free to go. Bye.